Hi there, my name is Dr. Justin Amery, and in this series of videos we're looking at coronavirus, hoping for the best and preparing for the worst. And in this video we're going to be looking at how to talk about care planning for loved ones or for patients or for clients. In the last videos we've looked at the fact that coronavirus for most people will be a mild illness, but for some people won't, and for a few people will lead to death. We've talked about death and dying, and we've talked about the importance of care planning. In this video, it's really aimed at other people who want to help people do that talking, because it's a very daunting topic to talk about. So a little bit about me. My name is Dr. Justin Amery. I'm a GP, family physician, also a palliative care doctor, working in Oxford in the UK. I've had 25 years experience, both in the UK and abroad, particularly working in children's palliative care in Uganda. I'm currently, sorry, as you can probably tell from my voice, stuck at home recovering from coronavirus, having been isolated. And during this time alone, I've been thinking about what I can do to help. All my colleagues are working hard, and it struck me that perhaps the best thing I can do is to create some videos for people who are frightened, particularly the elderly and vulnerable group of our society who are alone at home. And I suspect you all know someone like that, which is why you're watching this video. And the really important thing to get across is that we can hope for the best. It looks like probably 99% of people will survive this virus. We don't know yet because the data is very early. It may be higher, it might be lower. But in certain age groups, particularly the over 70s and people with other frailties, the risk of dying is higher. And so therefore, apart from hoping for the best, we also have to prepare for the worst. But these videos, what I'm trying to do is explain that even the worst isn't as bad as a lot of people think. But, and here's the big but, it's much worse unless you plan. We have to prepare for the worst. Hoping for the best is great, but sticking your head in the sand isn't. I completely understand it. Going into denial is a very natural human defense mechanism, and defense mechanisms are great. We're all defended to a certain extent, and they get us through life. But sticking your head in the sand in front of an oncoming lorry is not a good idea. So, what I'm trying to do in this video is to give you a very simple script. Imagine you need to go and speak to a loved one or a patient or somebody. I'm going to go through a script that you can use, just a few simple words. So here is a really simple script. If you use this, you honestly won't go too far wrong. It might feel a bit clunky. There'll be times when you feel embarrassed. There'll be times when you'll be feeling a bit frightened. But just when that happens, just sit back, take a breath, remember what you're doing. What you're doing is trying to make things better. Talking cannot make things worse. I promise you, talking cannot make things worse. Even if you say something that someone's not ready to hear yet, because they're defended, remember, they're defended. If they're defended, they're defended. They're defended against thinking about things they don't want to think about. As long as you're sensitive and you back away, don't just pull those through, everything will be fine. You really can't go too far wrong. We start with the first question, which is aimed at what people know, because if you start with what people know, you get them thinking about, oh, okay, crikey, I need to engage the brain to think about this thing. And also, if you ask people an open question, they'll start talking to you about the things that matter to them. So a very good question is, what do you know about coronavirus? So let's say I'm talking to Bob. Let's say my patient's Bob. Let's say he's 80. I'll say, Bob, what do you know about coronavirus? And if he's offended, he'll say, oh, I'll be fine, doctor. Anyway, I need to make my cup of tea. He probably won't say that. That's probably a bit, I'm pretty overdoing it. But you know what I mean. He'll give me a very clear signal he doesn't want to talk about it. But much more likely he'll say, oh yeah, I've heard about that coronavirus. And he might pause. And if he pauses, I'm pausing, because I can pause longer pauses than anybody else can pause, and so can you, okay? Because if he's pausing, he's thinking, and when someone pauses, the next thing that comes out of their mouth is usually golden. I've heard about coronavirus. I'm a bit worried about it. Bingo. He's used the word worried. Just use the open question. What are you worried about? So the first most important lesson, if there's one thing to take away from this, it's that every time you say something, every time you make an intervention, pause, watch, listen, check. Pause, watch, listen, check. You want to be super alert, like a superhero with super senses. Turn on your vision, turn on your hearing, turn on your feeling, turn on your thoughts, turn on your heart, turn on everything. And just be a kind of like a sensing ninja. Bob, you're worried. Would you find it helpful to talk about what might happen? You notice I've put some things in green. When I put something in green, it's kind of what's called a hidden suggestion. We do it all the time, but it's a hypnotic technique. Framing a direction as a question. Would you like to talk about what might happen is really a talk about what might happen. But the would you like to is a way of getting into people's subconscious so they feel more comfortable. If they don't want to, the defense will shut down. He doesn't have to talk. But if he does want to talk, you've given him permission. Bob, it's fine to talk. I'm going to pause and I'm going to watch and I'm going to listen. And Bob might say, you know what, Doctor, actually I would, but you probably haven't got time, because people always say that kind of thing. Or, you know, I'm sure you're busy, which is another way of saying, do I really want to talk about it? Or do I really want to talk about it with you? Or is this the kind of conversation I want? So they're kind of thinking about the conversation before they've had it. And one of the good things I hope about this video series is you don't have to do the talking now, right? So you can say, you know what, Bob? Yeah, it would be great to talk about it. But even better than talking about it, what you could do is we can watch a video. Now, if you're really busy and you're a doctor, you're probably not going to have a chance to sit down there and watch the video with Bob. If you're a friend or a family member, it'd be great, really great if you could stay there and watch it with Bob. If you're a professional, it'd be really great if you could get someone to watch it with Bob, because it's, you know, as you've seen from the previous videos, not easy stuff. But if nothing better, just say, Bob, look, there's some videos to watch. They're not easy, but I honestly think you'll find them comfortable. People have this idea that old people can't manage technology. Very rarely they can't, but actually they usually can with a little bit of help. And if you're a young, healthy person watching this, one thing you could really do, which would be incredibly useful, as long as you're not carrying the virus into Bob's house, is get into Bob's house, set his video up so you can watch it, and sit with him and make him a cup of tea while he's watching it. When he's watched the video, guess what? Pause, watch, listen, check. Oh, Bob, that was a hefty old video. Now you've seen it, I wonder what's going through your mind. Hidden command. Tell me what's going through your mind. You can adapt that. Some people like to talk about what they're thinking about, kind of more logical types. Some people like to talk about what they're feeling about, more feeling types. So you could say, tell me what's going through your mind, or you could say, tell me how that makes you feel. Doesn't really matter. Most people will interpret it the way they want. But if you get a sense that Bob's a thinker or a feeler, you can use. Guess what? Pause, watch, listen, check. Check back. Do you want to talk about some of the scenarios, Bob? We could talk about the best case scenario, or we could talk about the worst case scenario. Which would you want to talk about? So we're letting Bob give a sense of control here. He can choose which ones you want to talk about, whether it's the hardest bit first. Some people like to get the hard bit over and done with, or they want to start with the good stuff and then build his way up if he's not sure, because that gives him a chance to pull back if it's getting a bit too hard. But let's say, I don't mind, Doc. You might say, well, I'll tell you what, why don't we talk about the worst case scenario and get that out of the way? Ta-da! Pause, watch, listen, check. If you say to someone, shall we talk about the worst case scenario? What are we pausing for? What are we watching for? What are we listening for? If I said to you right now, I think you might be going to die. I mean, I wouldn't put it like that because that's not how I do it. But just imagine someone really blunt, not very good at communication, just said, okay, insert your name. I think you're going to die tomorrow. And what are you going to do with that information? Well, the first thing is you're going to get a sense of shock. And that's kind of where we're at as a country and as an international community at the moment. We're still in a shock. And then you're going to get a wave of anxiety. And we're also in that stage, there's a kind of wave of anxiety. So we're all rushing out to buy toilet roll for some reason. But eventually, once the shock's passed and the anxiety's passed, we're going to start thinking and we're going to have to process. And when we process, we kind of look away or we look down or we might sit back or we might, even though we're not supposed to touch our faces, we might touch our face. Don't worry, I'll wash my hands in a minute. And then when we're ready, everybody knows this, you don't have to go on a communication skills course. When we're ready to re-engage, we make eye contact again. So when Bob's made eye contact, he might say something. One, you can feel he's re-engaged. Get to the key question. Okay, so we've raised coronavirus. We've shown in the video. We've asked him to think about the worst case scenario. All right? He knows what the worst case scenario is because it's all over the news. Now, this is the key question. What are you most frightened of? What are you most frightened of? Do you mind if I ask what you're most frightened of? Perhaps you could tell me what you're most frightened of. This must be quite frightening for you. What are you most frightened of? Fear is the key. Fear is what makes this whole process 1,000 times worse. We need to get to where the fear is. And that takes courage, because to get to where our patient's fear is, to get to where the fear of our loved ones is, we have to overcome our own fear first. Because it means we have to overcome our own fear of talking about something we really don't want to talk about, because we're all human, we're all defended, and we all don't want to go there. But if you don't find out what Bob's frightened about, we're not going to be able to reassure him. And it's like children, you know, frightened of what's under the bed. Show them what's under the bed. Very, very rarely anything frightening. And even if there is something frightening, it's not as frightening as all that when we start talking about what we can do. And I'll refer you back to the video about how we actually manage people who are dying with coronavirus. Let's say Bob says, and it's probably going to be one of three things, like I did in the last video. He's probably going to be frightened about dying in pain and alone. He's probably going to be frightened about what's going to happen to his loved ones. And he's probably not going to be frightened but have concerns about some practical matters, what needs to be done. But if he doesn't talk about his fear of dying, suffering, alone, then you need to get there, because everybody really is frightened about that. Even people who are pretending to be brave, everyone's frightened of that. I'm frightened of that. It's just a natural fear. Fear of death is a completely healthy thing that keeps us alive. And he's almost certainly going to have concerns about his loved ones. And if he doesn't have any loved ones, it's going to make him think about his loved ones that he's lost. So we kind of need to go there as well. But I'm pretty sure either way he's going to share. But let's say he does the first, says, well, Doc, you know, is it going to, you know, he might not finish a sentence. People often delete their sentences. I'm wondering if perhaps, you know, some people have said that it can be quite difficult. He'll get there in the end if you give him time. He'll finish a sentence. And you say, well, Bob, you mean difficult in the sense of symptoms? Now you can get a bit more specific. Because if so, I can really reassure you. Did you see the video about where the doctor was talking about the symptoms, that even if you do get symptoms at the end of life, even if the coronavirus does come into your lungs, those symptoms are really, really easy to treat. You know, there's absolutely no reason why, even if the worst comes to the worst, you shouldn't be able to be allowed to die naturally, peacefully, and with dignity. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to manage that as long as we plan. And that's the thing. Now we can move on to reassurance. We've done the hard work, right? We've done the hard work. We've talked about death and dying. We've gone to where his fears are. Now we can be reassuring. Like, as long as we plan, if we make a plan, there's no reason that you should suffer or you should die alone. Reassure him there's no reason he should suffer or he should die alone. There really is no reason why he should suffer. These drugs are available, they're simple, and they're easy to use. Even if you don't have these drugs, pneumonia rarely causes serious symptoms. And if someone dies alone in our society in this day and age, something's gone wrong. If someone you know of might be dying alone, get in there. This is your chance. There are not many chances in life to do something really useful, but this is one of them. And then we just go through the care planning we went in the other video. I'll just whiz through it here. Where do you want to be cared for? If he says I want to be cared for at home, that means he doesn't want to be resuscitated, or at least he hasn't thought about it, because you can't resuscitate him at home, really. And if you do, it's not going to be successful. And anyway, he'd need to go on a ventilator. So there's not much point if he wants to be ventilated saying, I want to be cared for at home. But where do you want to be cared for is a much less scary question than do you want to be resuscitated? That's a really horrible question. Where do I want to be cared for? I want to be cared for at home. Okay, Bob, but do you know that means if your heart were to stop beating, we can't resuscitate you? So then you can go on to, so Bob, you do realise that if you want to be cared for at home, you wouldn't want to be resuscitated. Is that right? And from the medical perspective, that's really important, because the way the emergency services are set up is that if in doubt, blue lights, ambulances, resuscitation, casualty, intensive care unit, ventilation. So if you have to nip that process in the bud before it starts. So we do have to do a form for that, but we can do that form outside. At this stage of the conversation, it's just want to check, Bob, you want to be cared for at home. You don't want to die in hospital. That means that you don't really want resuscitation. Is that right? And then you can give them the facts and the figures that we talked about in the last video. Then you can say, Bob, wow, so that wasn't so hard. That's the hardest part over now. We can get on to talking about what you do want. Because, Bob, we're only talking about the worst, but now we can get back to hoping for the best. Because the fact is, you're alive. The fact is, hopefully you've got lots of life left. And although we've had this discussion, maybe you can now really focus on what's most important for you and prepare the things that you actually do want to do. There might be really important conversations that you want to have. There's some experiences that you haven't had, some relationships you need to fix, and memories you need to make. You may need to draw up some wills. You may need to draw up some plans. And now you can get practical. This is going to be much easier for Bob. You can get a pen and paper out. You can sit there. You can take notes together, and you can create your care plan. Remember, write it down, because if you don't write it down, people won't know about it. Doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be posh. Just write down care plan at the top. Where do I want to be looked after? How do I want to be looked after? Who do I want to look after me? If I want to be looked after at home and I don't want to be resuscitated, I want to be allowed to die with dignity, peacefully, and I don't want to die alone. Or I want the whole works. I want to be blue lighted into hospital, resuscitated, ITU, the whole works. And then share it. Share the care plan that we talked about in the last video, and finish the conversation by moving back into a positive space. If he's not exhausted, you're going to be exhausted. I feel exhausted just talking to you about this, let alone actually doing it. And I can't blame that on the coronavirus, because I've done this 1,000 times before in real life, in situations around children as well as adults. And it is exhausting. It's emotionally exhausting. So before you leave Bob, you need to move him back into a positive space. Ask him about a good memory or something he's got to look forward to. But whatever you do, get him into a positive space before you go. Don't finish without planning. So when you come to the end of the conversation, you need to connect. In these days of coronavirus, we're not supposed to touch. But this might be one situation where touch is okay. There's nothing quite as reassuring as a hug or a touch on the arm. If you're worried about getting it because you haven't had it, probably not so clever. If you've had it, great. If you're not sure, you can kind of go halfway. You can put a glove on You can touch him on the arm, you can hold his hand. As long as you wash your hands after, you have to decide whether or not you want to take the risk. But don't forget the importance of touch. And if you can't touch physically, we can touch kind of soul to soul, heart to heart, mind to mind, just by making eye contact, just by smiling and just showing that gentleness that is a natural human part of everybody. But whatever you do, make sure you plan to reconnect soon. Don't leave Bob hanging. Say, okay, Bob, so I'll pop in later, or give you a call later, or we'll get Dr. X to come around. Don't leave Bob hanging. He's just gone through a tough old time. So finish by connecting gently, always with a plan to reconnect. Connecting is key. And when you connected with Bob, when you leave Bob's house, you need to connect with yourself, because this is tough. It's not easy work, and you're going to get an emotional reaction. Every human being is going to get an emotional reaction to that kind of conversation. So just do something, just take a walk, listen to some music in the car, sing a song, just anything you do that just relaxes yourself, just to acknowledge, that was tough. So that was the end of perhaps the hardest one for people on the outside trying to help. Remember, what we're trying to get to is helping Bob and people like Bob recognise that it's his life, his death, it's his choice. You can do that by planning. We're hoping for the best, but we're preparing for the worst, and that's what this series of videos has been about. I hope you found it comforting, if a bit tough. Please, please, please share this video and the other videos with people you know who might benefit from it, and pretty much everybody will. It's not going to help if it's sitting on YouTube. It might do a lot of good, because this epidemic is moving quite quickly, and we need to make decisions and plans soon. Anyway, all, thanks for watching. Do take care. Bye-bye.